Yay, bonus video! Honestly, I didn't even know that I was gonna do this until just a few hours ago. So here we are. Okay, that's a partial lie. I wrote parts of a script. I got some bullet points on my screen that I wrote a few days ago, and at least 3 times now I've gotten ready to film and then have just given up and sort of just laying on my bed in sorrow. I've been kind of going through a funk. I think the everything of everything has just been getting to me, but I'm here to cheer myself up and do a secret bonus video for this little Mabab series that I've done. So this should be coming out in November. I'm recording everything out of order, so I have no idea what's going on. I realized last minute that I'm kind of trying to mirror and almost strip for parts my original first ever video, a deep dive into My Babysitter's a Vampire. I mean, technically it isn't, but like, it basically is. And I gave Jesse his own part in that video, so theoretically I should also do so now. So yeah, as soon as I realized I had this discrepancy, I very quickly came up with some thoughts about Jesse for his own video. But this one's a lot more casual. As you can see, I'm on my webcam. I could not be bothered to set up my actual camera. So, apologies, but you know, whatever. It's par for the course at this point. I think you guys are used to seeing me in like 380p by now. So, specifically, I want to get into the sort of origin of Jesse Black as a character and how he's basically a spoof / commentary on Edward Cullen, who is the main character in the series Twilight, although I'm pretty sure you already know that. I would say that this commentary is most obvious in his relationship with Sarah and the religious implications of his vampire coven, along with some other miscellaneous things that I'll probably get around to mentioning at some point. Also, Edward Cullen as a character is not new or special in itself. He himself has an origin that traces way back to essentially the beginning of modern literary history. So, first we need to talk about who Jesse Black is, for those who are unaware. I'm assuming most of you guys have seen Mabab. If not, I'm here to plug Ethan's upload channel. I'm going to leave in the description of this video a link to a YouTube playlist with the entire series uploaded in HD, including the movie. So please just watch the entire series. It's only 26 episodes and a movie pilot, so you'll breeze through it real fast. And it's such a good watch, trust me. Although I really don't see anyone who hasn't at least heard of the show clicking on this video. But for those who need a refresher, Jesse Black is the main villain of the My Babysitter's a Vampire series. His real name is Horace Black, and he ran a cult, a vampire cult. We're going to call it a coven, just because that's what the Cullen coven is called in Twilight, and it'll just make more sense to draw the parallels that way. He calls it his flock in the series, but I don't like that term, so we're just not going to use it. Jesse is running his little coven, as we're going to call it, in Black's Church, which is a town that was named after him in the 19th century. We don't know his origin previously to this. We just know that he is the ruler of a town of vampires that feed on the local townspeople. So because of this, the Order is created, which is a group of spellmasters, earth priests, earth priestesses, and they defeat Jesse and his coven. They form and create the Lucifractor, which can kill a vampire. It's like canonically the only like magical thing that can kill a vampire, other than your classic like steaks and garlic and holy water and stuff. They create the Lucifractor and defeat his entire coven, and he escapes, and they rename the town Whitechapel. So that is the sort of origin of the town of Whitechapel, which is where the show takes place. It's in Ontario, by the way, for those who don't know that it's Canadian. We cut to the late 2000s and early 2010s when Jesse is back and he's trying to rebuild his coven and specifically resurrect all of the vampires that died back in 1894. So he's turning a bunch of high schoolers into vampires because they're gullible and don't know any better to join his coven, which is then he's going to use to kill 219 souls to sort of trade in the underworld or some bullshit for the 219 fallen vampires. And of course, 2 14-year-old boys thwart this after knowing about it for like 2 weeks. God, I love this show. All that lore about the Order and the Lucifractor and stuff doesn't come in until the season 2 finale, and it's quite rushed, I will say. So we don't know that much on how that whole dynamic works. I famously have had a crash out about the fact that there is just like random lore dropped within the last like 2 minutes of the show's entire existence, and then it's canceled. So we never get a resolution or more depth on what any of that means. What the fuck is the collar? Oh my god. The collar? The collar? There's like fucking 5 minutes left in this episode and they introduce the collar, the way that other vampire councils communicate with each other. What is this bullshit? Collar. Also, to me, the fact that his name is Horace is notable. I'm wondering if that is connected to the poet in any way, the famous poet from the 200 BC range. Is that supposed to be a hint at the possible time period he was turned? I wouldn't think so. Again, we don't know much about Jesse before the fact that like he's running Black Church. Oh, and that he's a pastor or a priest. I can't remember exactly what they call him. He's a reverend. He's Reverend Horace Black. There we go. So that means he's Catholic, right? That'll be important later. And I would argue how Jesse behaves throughout the series is where the Edward Cullen comparison really comes into play. So why was Jesse as a villain created? I think it's because of Edward Cullen, obviously. I already talked about this in my Sarah video, which was released previously, but to give a quick recap, the relationship is very clearly supposed to be commentary on the Edward-Bella dynamic, which is to say that I bet the writers of this show were screaming at their televisions when they watched the first Twilight movie, saying that it's the most toxic thing they'd ever seen in the entire world. They probably wondered, why do people see this as romantic? I'm going to prove just how unromantic it is and put it as a storyline in my show. Which is going to be for kids, so no one's going to actually get it, and then they're going to forget the show even exists because it gets canceled early. It's a rough fate, I must say. That was one of the only valid criticisms of Edward at the time. Most of them were just like, boo, show for girls, and boo, we don't think to analyze it further beyond that. If it's for girls, so that means it's bad. But my question is, why is Edward the way he is? I'm gonna try to explain why. Please stay with me, guys, okay? We're gonna go on a bit of a tangent. There's a literary precedent for this kind of main character, which can be found all the way back in the first ever novel, or at least what is theorized to be the first ever novel. I actually have it on the shelf. Can I reach it? Got it. Haha. So in the mid-18th century, Samuel Richardson published the book Pamela, or Virtue Rewarded, which is the most loaded title probably ever. This book can be considered possibly the first novel of all time, and details the life and times of the titular 16-year-old Pamela. It is described in intense detail how she tries to survive her job as an embroiderer and mender for the Andrews family. Said life and times involve her getting kidnapped and sexually assaulted multiple times, and a constant wave of salacious accusations of performing virtue, all while her employer and eventual husband, Mr. B, who inherits her as a servant and is 10 years her senior, does all of this to her. Like, he's the one doing all of this. He's the one kidnapping her and assaulting her. While someone may say, despite all of this, Pamela was very successful, the proper response is something more akin to because of this, or in tandem with all of this, since Pamela as a novel exists as a conduct book. Meaning that the elements of the plot were the reasons for its success, not despite of it, and one of the contributing factors to the rise of the novel as a genre in the 18th century. This, of course, is not without some backlash, even within the time of the book's original editions being published. If one were want to search for a 21st century Pamela, I would argue Twilight would be an adept comparison. Why don't I have it? It's right behind me. I gotta have the prop. Here it is. A modern comparison. Twilight. Even though Twilight is not a conduct book like Pamela, and critically has had a much different reputation, the reason for said searching goes back to the ways in which both novels have impacted the literary history, along with what lessons have, or have not, been learnt by its context, content, and success. Twilight became famous for its paranormal romance between 17-year-old Bella Swan and 104-year-old vampire Edward Cullen, who is physically frozen at the same age as his future partner, an aspect of the power imbalances and controversial pairings being evident. In case you didn't already know any of that about Twilight, which I'm assuming you do. Yeah, so if I may repeat about Pamela, it is a book about a 16-year-old who is impoverished and is hired by an elderly lady to be a mender and an embroiderer, and then that elderly lady dies, and her wealthy son inherits Pamela, grows a weird infatuation with her, and tries to kiss her and does assault her multiple times. And he tries to pay her off to not say anything about this assault. She doesn't say anything about this assault because as a servant, she is constantly being questioned whether she is actually virtuous or not, or is actually a slut trying to woo Mr. B. He's 26, by the way, as far as we're aware. Since this thing is long as hell, it's goddamn 500 pages, we get so much more drama, but what's mainly important is that they end up getting married at the end, or at least at the 2/3 point. And then more drama happens, and we find out he has a secret love child from, like, a dark past life. We don't need to get into it. Yeah, a couple semesters ago, I wrote a paper where I compared these two books, and I had a lot of fun doing it, and so I thought I would bring in some of the research I did for that into my discussions on Jessie, because if Jessie is a foil, one could say, to Edward, and Edward is a foil to Mr. B, then what does this say about My Babysitter's a Vampire, is what my question is. Again, I did detail this in my previous video, but for those who didn't watch that one, or for those who just want more of me talking right now, Jesse is also a manipulative, power-hungry guy who finds women to enact this power fantasy onto. He finds Sarah and decides that he wants her to be his companion for forever with this whole coven thing he's trying to grow. So he forcibly turns her, even though she was in no way interested in being a vampire. It's done against her will. In the same way that the multiple sexual assaults that happened to Pamela were against her will. Specifically, what happens in Pamela is that Mr. B will push her onto a bed and start kissing her, and she'll freak out so much that she'll pass out. And Mr. B will go like, ew, whoa, 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 and walk away from the situation. At least we assume. This is written in an epistolary format, which means that it's letters that she's writing to her parents. So she describes herself as passing out, writing this as a letter from, like, what happened the day before. And as far as we're aware, what the other servants tell her when she wakes up is that he did nothing to her and that he stepped away. But we don't know for sure. Again, a big part of the conflict when it comes to the criticism of Pamela specifically is that people don't believe Pamela. They think she's an unreliable narrator. Because at the time of the novel's conception, the epistolary format seemed to be the only way to get a true insight into the main character's mind. But the epistolary format, because it is being written for an audience, like the letters are being written to someone, that automatically implies that there is, like, hidden things in between the lines. And so many people will theorize that Pamela is lying, that she's a slut, or, you know, that it's actually much worse than she's describing, etc., etc. That's actually specifically discussed in, oh god, where is it? Right here. 2 parody spoofs of Pamela called Anti-Pamela and Shamala, which I have copies of in this compilation here. 2 great titles for parodies. They don't make parodies like they used to. I swear, satire was at its peak in the 18th century. Is Jesse a good satire of Edward? Yes, because he's basically Mr. B, and Edward is, like, accidentally Mr. B, in a sense. Edward crosses just so many lines and does so many bad things to Bella, like stalking her, watching her sleep, making her feel unsafe and being, I'm just doing it to protect you. And she just has to be okay with all of it in the same way that Pamela is. The only difference is that Bella seems to like it. Famously, it's described as the lamb falling in love with the lion, or whatever the fuck he says in the book. It's been a while, y'all. Although, you know, it hasn't been a while. Me reading Midnight Sun, which I also have a copy of, and I was just reading today. Again, I think this is my favorite Twilight book, y'all. This thing is absolutely insane. This thing has probably ruined my life. But this is a video about my Bab, isn't it? The biggest unanswered question, or at least not justifiably answered question about Twilight and Midnight Sun, is why is Edward in high school? I agree. He seems to hate it. It's just because him and the whole Cullen coven have just decided to cosplay humans because it's Carlisle's way. This is what the patriarch of the coven believes, and so they all follow it, and they've convinced themselves that they believe in it too, even though that requires them to go to high school for forever, which sounds like hell. Edward describes it as hell, yet he still thinks it's the way. Literally every other vampire in the universe thinks that they're weird for doing this, but it's the only explanation we get for why Edward's in high school, because he's 17 and he's cosplaying as a human, and 17-year-olds go to high school. For Jesse, the reason is because he's trying to build a cult, and the best people that you assign to cults are the vulnerable and the ill-equipped, and I would argue that teenagers are more likely to be in that place. Since they're children, they're more easily manipulated, but they're not like infants, so you can boss them around and tell them to go do things. Like they can drive a car, but their brains are still squishy. So what would happen in real life if a vampire decided to approach a teenage girl and begin a relationship with her? It's like if all the toxic elements of Twilight were done on purpose. And I think that's delicious. I think that's just so tasty, even though there's a lot to get into there. But see, making Jesse the villain changes the context of things that is not present in these novels, which I'll get to in a little bit. So there have been many theorizations on why these romantic interests behave the way they do, since their contributions to the narrative are one of the many active elements that are dropping the quality of the story for many readers, contradicting what the product said it was going to be on the tin, which is, for Twilight, sexy romance, vampire, paranormal romance, and for Pamela, how to be girl. In my opinion, the function that these men should hold in their story is that of good lovers to the protagonists for said product to produce its intent successfully. An explanation for this constituted behavior is an amalgamation of power control fantasies and psychosis for both, and is likely either an accident on the author's behalf or smoothed over to serve a larger purpose of discerning how relationships of this caliber should go. Edward Cullen is riddled with mental health issues and has an intense superiority complex when it comes to dealing with humans, since his mind-reading abilities cause him to despise everyone. Did I not mention that he can read minds? Because he can. The same could be said for Jesse. Instead of mind-reading, it's mind-controlling, because he has that ability to glamour people. He's the only vampire besides Anastasia that we see glamour people, and we can assume that they're both from around the same time period. So there you go. Also, Jesse can do telekinesis, but we don't know if that's a vampire power or not. He can just do that. Since Edward isn't privy to Bella's inner monologue because of her own unidentified powers at play, he both infantilizes and overanalyzes every action she makes, and uses this information to try and control her for her own good. I'm going to quote a line from Sarah Elizabeth Gallagher's book, Why We Love and Hate Twilight, since it goes into immense detail about the inner psyche of Edward, and I pre-ordered it before it came out because apparently this is just my life now. Also, I should have grabbed it off the shelf before I sat down. Oh god, I'm gonna have to actually get up for this one. Midnight Sun reveals Edward to be deeply insecure, plagued by overwhelming self-loathing and anxiety, and morally gray at best in the way he justifies his actions. So yeah, he's not that stand-up of a guy. Who would have thought? It's possible that these main characters and readers didn't know that what their hero was doing was outright abusive, but the more possibly accurate interpretation is that the benefits greatly outweighed the downsides. Good looks, money, influence, and an escape from a previously unsupportive background could all seem worth having to deal with the constant violent emotional outbursts, and the restricting forces of being shackled to said emotionally volatile person. This description could easily describe both Edward Cullen and Mr. B, with Bella and Pamela's happy endings evidently having a lot more addendums than was previously interpreted. Patriarchy, yay! But see, that's the thing. These characters are the romantic leads, and the ones who we are supposed to root for getting with the main characters. But Jesse is straight up the villain in Mabav. This heavily changes the context. The message isn't just put up with it like it was before. It's now, this is something that villains do, and is something that is bad, which makes me just feel 10 times more sane. Next, I want to talk about the religious aspects of Jesse as a character. Again, I'm pretty sure he's supposed to be a Catholic reverend, and previously I had assumed that this side of him greatly clashed with the vampiric existence. But now that I'm a lot more versed on Twilight, I could definitely say that these are probably easily in tandem with each other when it comes to his character. You could say that a lot of Jesse's coven actions are similar to the Volturi, which to a certain degree are a Catholic metaphor because the author of Twilight is very Mormon, and famously to Mormons, the Catholic Church are evil. I grew up Catholic. That's all I'm going to say on that. This idea of control through sheer power and exuding one's power to enforce dominance, you get it. This seems to be the way that Jesse is sort of running things. He's running the show. He is clearly the de facto leader, and all the other vampires we see around his coven work for him. The only other two vampires in his coven that really get names are Wes and Gord, both of which are killed by Sarah and Ethan respectively. Besides all of the Mormonisms that are present in Twilight and all of the Methodist affiliations and allegories that are present within Pamela, the most obvious religious angle of both of these novels comes from its platforming of their female counterparts' roles of getting married and being caretakers for their masculine counterparts. In the sense of organized religion, I'll just say. For Bella, it's the price she has to pay to be with Edward, because it's important to note that she has no desire to be a wife or mother. And for Pamela, it's her ticket out of adverse poverty, which is the whole reason why she's a servant at such a young age to begin with. She starts at the age of 12, which is where both can fulfill their virtuous feminine role and be rewarded. Twilight is ridiculed by critics and rabidly adored by fans, with its inherent religious connotations seemingly not being discovered because of a lack of care placed towards the novel as an actual piece of credible media that should be analyzed in a way which uncovers layers and depths of nuance, and also give an actual tangible reason to not like the novels. Sure, the take Twilight is bad is not a hot take anymore, but Twilight is bad nuance definitely is. So why are these stories like this? Something that's important to know is that all of these male characters are not the main characters. The main characters are their female counterparts. The same goes for Sarah to a certain degree. To get some perspective on that, I'm going to quote from the book Revising Women, 18th Century Women's Fiction and Social Engagement. Specifically, I'm going to quote the very beginning sort of introduction, which was written by the person who edited this all together, Paula Backscheider. Hope I'm pronouncing your last name right. This is a crucial point. The narrative point of view is that of the other. Since the dominant social genre privilege point of view is indeed dominant, familiar, expected, writers had to devote a large proportion of the narrative and plot space to the rival perspective if it were to be comprehended or even recognized. In these texts, it was, however, cast into the role of competing for approval, and therefore the characters of its heroes were tested, and so was their discourse. Thus, fiction asked those in that ruling position to accept telling or authoritative judgments about them and their ways of governing the family and society from those below them. Those they had legislated to be silent. Twilight and Pamela do this, yet come around to still upholding the status quo at the end of the day. A strikingly obvious element of both Twilight and Pamela is how normal and plain their main characters are before their whirlwind marriage plots. Said plain nature is contrasted with their continuous suffering that is eventually alleviated by their abusers eventually accepting them, so that they can no longer be the other in their society and relationships, aka get married. So the message of these novels, which provided interiority into a previously understood to be unnecessary perspective of the other, did the work of providing said interiority in a way that showed the system they were suppressed within was a place they needed to be, and that one needed to better fit the mold to no longer be suppressed, instead of try and change what was suppressing them in the first place, which was their romantic partners. Edward and Mr. B's behavior and their conduct within their relationship makes this observation the most clear. And see, that's why I like Jesse so much as a character, because this is all true. This is what Jesse was going to do. This was his plan, to enact this whole situation. And for that, he's the villain, not the romantic love interest. Which is why it really, really makes me very upset, actually, when I get comments from people being like, they were meant to be, they're the best romance, I would say yes in a heartbeat to him asking me to run away with him. Like, no! Run away! While Pamela could so obviously have this discrepancy present in its story in a much easier way due to its early existence as a novel and being a part of the long 18th century, Twilight had to rework its adoption of this trope with the supernatural and the character's desire to become a vampire just like Edward. As Kelly Budruitt, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, wrote in Twilight's heteronormative reversal of the monstrous, utopia, and the gothic design, which is an article so I don't have it physically. What they wrote is, since these outcomes are contingent on becoming a wife and mother, the object of desire in the series is deeply embedded in the traditional structure of gender roles. Becoming a vampire seems the perfect solution for solving the problems of female identity in a post-feminist world. Bella chooses all of this stuff, although I would argue she does not choose to marry Edward. She just wants to dick him down so bad. She wants it so bad that she's willing to do something that she would never do, which is marry the man just to get it. Then she wants to keep her child, but once she actually gives birth, she does not have a single interest in her kid. All she cares about is boning Edward. Again, that's all she cares about, which, good for her. So Bella's story becomes modern because she got to choose her outcome. But did Sarah get to? I think that's all. Good night, tri-state area. Imagine being me, having to carry all these books with me to the library just so I could write this stupid bullshit. Okay.
So kiss me, kiss me, kiss me.